The construction crew found the metal box buried 3 feet deep in the German forest on a Tuesday morning in October 2019, and within 4 hours, the historian from the Battle of Hürtgen Forest Museum was staring at a journal that would rewrite a small piece of World War II history. The foreman had stopped the excavator immediately when the blade hit metal. They were clearing land for a new wind farm in what used to be called Hürtgen Forest, about 20 miles southeast of Aachen, near the Belgian border. These days, it's just forest again, peaceful and green, the kind of place German families go hiking on weekends. But in 1944, it was Die Hölle von Hurtgen, Hell in Hurtgen, where more Americans died per square mile than anywhere else in the European theater. When they pulled the metal ammunition box from the earth, it was wrapped in oilcloth, preserved like someone had buried it deliberately, carefully, with intention. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a rubberized poncho, was a leather journal, somehow still legible after 7 decades in the ground. Along with it were dog tags, 2 sets. One read, Becker, Thomas J., the other, Morrison, Daniel P. The first page had a name, Thomas J. Becker, Corporal, U.S. Army, 1st Infantry Division, 26th Infantry Regiment. The second page had a date, November 19th, 1944, and a single line, 5th day, one of us dies today. Klaus Weber, the historian from the Battle of Hürtgen Forest Museum, arrived within an hour of the discovery. He'd been cataloging artifacts from the battle for 20 years, but he'd never seen anything like this. The journal was in remarkable condition. Someone had wrapped it properly before burial. This wasn't battlefield debris. This was a deliberate preservation. The dog tags, Weber told the construction foreman, his hand shaking as he read them. Thomas Becker was listed as killed in action, November 1944. But this journal, it goes beyond that date. And who is Daniel Morrison? The foreman shrugged. We just dig, Herr Weber. You're the historian. Weber opened the journal carefully. The pages were yellowed but intact, the ink faded but readable. This is extraordinary. This is a day-by-day account of a sniper duel, every shot, every movement. And look at this last entry. It's dated 1972, not 1944. So he survived the war? It appears so. But the U.S. Army thinks he died here. Weber pulled out his phone. I need to contact the Americans immediately. The Pentagon responded within 12 hours. They sent a team from the U.S. Army's Past Conflict Repatriations Branch, the people who still search for MIA soldiers from World War II, Korea, Vietnam. The lead investigator was Major Patricia Chen, whose grandfather had fought in the Pacific. She read the journal on the flight over, and by the time she landed in Frankfurt, she'd already pulled Becker's complete service record, Thomas James Becker. Born March 15, 1922, in Traverse City, Michigan. Enlisted September 1942. Expert marksman qualification at Fort Benning. Deployed to North Africa with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, in early 1943. Fought through Sicily, landed at Omaha Beach on D-Day, liberated towns across northern France. By the time his unit entered Hürtgen Forest in November 1944, he had 41 confirmed kills and a Bronze Star. The official record showed that Corporal Becker was killed in action on November 20, 1944, during the assault on Hill 232. His body was never recovered. Listed as MIA, later changed to KIA presumed. His mother received a telegram, a folded flag, and a Purple Heart. She died in 1967, never knowing what really happened to her son. But the journal told a different story. November 15, 1944. First day. Tommy Becker had been in Hürtgen Forest for 4 days when it started. 4 days of the worst fighting he'd seen since Normandy, and that was saying something. The forest was different from anything they'd faced before. The trees were planted in perfect rows, like soldiers themselves, so thick you couldn't see more than 30 yards in any direction. When German artillery hit the treetops, it created tree bursts, shells exploding in the canopy, sending wood splinters and metal fragments straight down like rain. Nowhere was safe. Foxholes became graves. The 26th Infantry Regiment was trying to take a series of hills that controlled the roads through the forest. Hill 232 was the key. From its crest, you could see for miles when the fog lifted, which wasn't often. The Germans had fortified it with bunkers, machine gun nests, and minefields, and they had snipers. Becker was set up in a shell crater about 300 yards from the German lines, his Springfield rifle resting on a fallen log, his scope scanning the enemy positions through the morning mist. His spotter, Private Danny Morrison from Brooklyn, lay beside him with binoculars. They'd been together since Sicily. Danny was 19, told bad jokes, and had eyes like a hawk. He could spot movement in shadows that Becker couldn't see, even through his scope. "Tommy," Danny whispered, using the name only he was allowed to use. "When we get home, you're coming to Brooklyn for my wedding, right?" "Danny, we're in the middle of—" I know, but Mary wrote yesterday. She already picked the church. St. Catherine's on Metropolitan Avenue. Spring of '46, she says. You'll be my best man?" Becker smiled despite himself. "If you stop talking and spot targets, yeah, I'll be your best man. You better bring that Michigan girl you keep writing. Elizabeth, right? Mary wants to meet her." Danny adjusted his binoculars. Got something. 10 o'clock, about 200 yards, base of the big pine with the broken top. Becker swung his rifle slowly, found the tree. Nothing. Then, there, a tiny movement, the edge of a helmet maybe, or the tip of a rifle barrel. He settled his crosshairs on the spot and waited. Sniping was about patience more than marksmanship. You could be the best shot in the world, but if you couldn't wait, couldn't control your breathing and your heartbeat and your urge to pull the trigger, you'd never make it as a sniper. The movement again. Definitely a helmet. German. Becker could see the distinctive shape, the flat rim. The soldier was well concealed, dug in behind a log with branches piled in front for camouflage. Only the top 2 inches of his helmet showed, and only when he moved to scan through his own scope. Another sniper. Becker felt his pulse quicken. Sniper versus sniper was different from picking off regular infantry. It was personal, intimate, a duel where both men knew exactly what the other was thinking, what the other was capable of. Most sniper duels ended quickly, 1 shot, 1 kill. But sometimes, when both men were skilled and careful, it could go on for days. "Range?" Becker whispered. 210, maybe 220 yards, Danny replied. "No wind, clear shot if he shows himself." The German sniper's helmet disappeared. Becker waited. 5 minutes. 10. His shoulder began to ache from holding position, but he didn't move. Movement was death in this game. Then Danny made a sound, half gasp, half gurgle. Becker turned his head slightly and saw the hole in Danny's forehead, perfectly centered, blood and brain matter splattered on the leaves behind him. Danny's eyes were still open, still looking through the binoculars, but the life was gone. Becker didn't move. Couldn't move. The German had seen Danny somehow. Maybe caught a reflection off the binocular lenses. Maybe saw him shift position slightly. 1 shot. No sound. The crack of the rifle lost in the constant artillery bombardment that was the background noise of Hürtgen Forest. The smart thing would be to retreat. Call for support. Get another spotter. But Becker looked at Danny, 19 years old, from Brooklyn, told bad jokes, and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was personal now. He waited until dark, then carefully, inch by inch, pulled Danny's body deeper into the crater, found Danny's entrenching tool and started digging. Not a proper grave, no time for that, but enough to keep the rats away. As he dug, he found Danny's wallet. Picture of his girl, Mary. Picture of his parents outside their apartment building. Ticket stub from a movie they'd seen in London on leave. Going my way with Bing Crosby. Becker put the wallet in his pocket. He'd send it home if he survived this. When he survived this. Because he was going to kill that German sniper. Not for the war effort, not for the regiment. For Danny Morrison from Brooklyn, who was 19 and told bad jokes and would never see Mary again. November 16th, 1944. Second day. Becker didn't sleep. He spent the night thinking, planning, remembering everything he'd learned about German snipers. They were trained differently from Americans. More emphasis on camouflage and patience. They could stay in one position for days, pissing in bottles, eating cold rations, barely moving. Their rifles were superior, usually Mausers with Zeiss scopes, accurate out to 800 yards or more. And they hunted in pairs, just like Americans. Which meant the German sniper who killed Danny probably had his own spotter somewhere. At first light, Becker was in a new position, 50 yards to the left of where he'd been yesterday. He'd spent 2 hours before dawn creating a hide, a shallow depression covered with branches and leaves, with just enough of a gap to see through. His rifle was painted with mud to kill any reflection. He'd rubbed dirt on his face, his hands, even his fingernails. He moved only his eyes, scanning the German positions through his scope. The broken-topped pine was still there, but he couldn't see any sign of the sniper. The German had probably moved too. That's what Becker would have done. Never use the same position twice. But the German was still out there, somewhere in that 200-yard stretch of forest, waiting for Becker to make a mistake. The waiting was the hardest part. Your mind started to wander. You thought about home, about food, about women. You remembered things you'd rather forget. Becker thought about Danny, about the first time they'd met in Sicily, when Danny had saved his life by spotting an Italian machine gun nest Becker had missed, about the time in France when they'd found a wine cellar in a destroyed chateau and gotten drunk on vintage Bordeaux, about Danny's plans to marry Mary when he got home, open a deli in Brooklyn, have 5 kids. Movement. Not near the pine tree, farther right, near a cluster of 3 trees growing close together. Just a shadow shifting slightly, but Becker had learned to trust his peripheral vision. He slowly moved his scope to the right. There. A shape that didn't quite match the natural lines of the forest. Could be a rock. Could be a helmet. Becker watched for 20 minutes. The shape didn't move. Then a squirrel ran across a branch above the shape, and Becker saw it, the tiniest flinch, a human reaction to unexpected movement. The German was there, so well camouflaged that even knowing his location, Becker could barely make him out. But barely was enough. Becker centered his crosshairs on where he thought the German's head should be, controlled his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Finger on the trigger, steady pressure, wait for the natural pause between heartbeats. The log in front of the German exploded, showering wood chips. At the same instant, Becker heard the crack of a rifle and felt the wind of a bullet pass inches from his head. Another sniper. The spotter, somewhere to his right. Becker rolled left just as another bullet smacked into the ground where his head had been. He kept rolling, leaves and dirt flying, until he was behind a thick oak tree. His heart was hammering. 2 snipers. They'd been waiting for him to shoot, watching for his muzzle flash. It was a trap, and he'd almost walked into it. But now he knew there were two of them. And he knew approximately where they were. The one near the 3 trees, and another somewhere to the right, maybe 50 yards from the first. They'd have overlapping fields of fire, each covering the other. Standard German sniper doctrine. Becker smiled grimly. 2 could play that game. He just had to be smarter, more patient, more careful, and he had to do it alone. He spent the rest of the day moving, inch by painful inch, to a new position. Not retreating. That's what they'd expect. Instead, he moved laterally, parallel to the German lines, using every bit of cover, every shadow, every fold in the ground. By nightfall, he was 200 yards from where he'd started, looking at the German positions from a completely different angle. November 17th, 1944, 3rd day. The rain started before dawn. Not a heavy rain, just a steady drizzle that dripped from the pine needles and turned the forest floor into mud. It was miserable for infantry, but perfect for a sniper. Rain masked sound, limited visibility, and made people careless. They hunched their shoulders, pulled their helmets low, looked down instead of out. Becker had found what he was looking for, a slight rise in the ground that gave him a view of both German positions. The sniper near the 3 trees and his partner about 40 yards to the right dug in behind a pile of rocks. From his original position, he never could have seen the second sniper, but from here he had clear shots at both. The problem was distance. He was now over 400 yards away, at the extreme range of his Springfield, and in the rain, with the wind picking up, making that shot would be nearly impossible. He needed them to move, to come to him. So he gave them a target. He took off his helmet and jacket, stuffed them with branches and leaves to create a vague human shape, found a long stick and attached it to the back of the helmet. Then he crawled 50 yards away, trailing a piece of string he'd taken from Danny's pack. The string was attached to the stick. Pull the string, the helmet would move slightly. From 400 yards away, in the rain, it would look like a careless soldier shifting position. Becker settled into his new hide and pulled the string. The helmet moved. He waited 10 minutes, pulled again. Through his scope, he could see the German positions, but no movement. They were disciplined, careful. He kept at it for 2 hours, pull the string, wait, watch, pull again. His hands were numb from the cold rain. Water dripped from his eyebrows into his eyes. His clothes were soaked through, but he kept watching, kept pulling that string. Finally, movement from the rocks. The second sniper was shifting position, trying to get a better angle on the helmet. Becker could see him now, not clearly, but enough. German field gray uniform, rifle with a scope. The man moved carefully, but he was focused on the helmet, not scanning for other threats. Becker steadied his rifle on a fallen branch. 420 yards, Danny would have said. Adjust for elevation, shooting slightly downhill. Wind from the left, maybe 3 miles per hour. Rain wouldn't affect the bullet much at this range, but it would affect visibility. The German sniper stopped moving, settling into his new position. He was lining up a shot on the helmet. Becker centered his crosshairs on the man's head, then dropped them slightly to compensate for distance, controlled his breathing. Found that calm place where everything disappeared except the target and the crosshairs. He squeezed the trigger. The Springfield bucked against his shoulder. Through the scope, he saw the German's head snap back, a spray of red mist in the rain. The man collapsed forward over his rifle. 1 down. Immediately, Becker rolled right, expecting return fire from the first sniper. It came, a bullet cracking through the branches where he'd been, then another. The German was firing rapidly, trying to pin him down. but rapid fire meant less accuracy. Becker kept rolling until he was behind a cluster of trees. The German couldn't see him here, but Becker couldn't see the German either. Stalemate. Except now it was one-on-one, and the German had just lost his partner. He'd be rattled, angry, maybe angry enough to make a mistake. The firing stopped. The forest was quiet except for the rain and the distant thunder of artillery. Becker waited. The German was probably moving, trying to flank him or get to a better position, or maybe retreating. With his partner dead, the smart move would be to fall back, report the American sniper's position, call in artillery. But Becker didn't think this German would retreat. Not after 2 days of this cat-and-mouse game. This was personal for him too now. An hour passed. 2. The rain stopped, but the trees kept dripping. Becker's hands had gone from numb to painful as feeling returned. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but he didn't move. The first one to move would lose. Then he heard it, barely audible. A metallic click, like a rifle bolt being worked. Close, very close. The German had used the rain and the waiting to move, just like Becker had done yesterday. He was maybe 50 yards away, probably trying to get a clear shot through the trees. Becker slowly reached for a rock, threw it to his left. It crashed through the branches. Immediately, a rifle cracked and bark exploded from a tree 20 feet to Becker's left. The German had revealed his position, behind a massive fallen log 40 yards away. But 40 yards was too close for a scope. Becker would have to do this with iron sights. He carefully, silently removed the scope from his Springfield. The rifle felt naked without it, lighter, but he'd learned to shoot with iron sights long before he'd ever touched a scope. Another rock, this time to the right. Another shot from the German. The man was good. His reactions were instant, his aim true. But he was also predictable. He was shooting at movement without confirming targets. Becker found a thick branch on the ground beside him. About 3 feet long, sturdy. He tied his canteen to one end, then slowly extended it to his left, using his left hand while keeping his rifle ready in his right. The canteen caught on some branches, rustled the leaves. The German fired. The canteen exploded, water spraying. But in that split second of muzzle flash, Becker saw exactly where the German was. He snapped his rifle up, found the spot in his iron sights and fired 3 times rapidly. Worked the bolt between each shot with practiced smoothness. Bark and wood chips flew from the log. Silence. Becker waited. 5 minutes. 10. No return fire, no movement. Either the German was dead, or he was playing dead, waiting for Becker to expose himself by checking. Becker found another rock, threw it at the fallen log. Nothing. Another rock. Still nothing. Either dead or incredibly disciplined. There was only one way to find out. Becker started moving, but not toward the German. He moved laterally again, keeping trees between himself and the log until he could see behind it from an angle. The German was there, slumped against the log, his rifle across his lap. Blood on his chest. Not moving. But Becker had learned not to trust apparent death. He watched for 5 more minutes, looking for the rise and fall of breathing, any tiny movement. Nothing. Finally, he approached, rifle ready. The German sniper was young, maybe 22. Blonde hair, blue eyes, now staring at nothing. One of Becker's bullets had caught him in the chest, probably nicked the heart. Quick death. There was a photograph in his breast pocket, soaked with blood. A woman and 2 small children. A farm in the background. Becker took the German's rifle. A Kar 98K with a Zeiss scope, beautiful weapon, and his ammunition. Found his Soldbuch, his military identity document. Gefreiter Wilhelm Müller, 275th Infantry Division, from a place called Rothenburg. There was a letter in his pocket, half-written, never to be sent. Liebste Anna, it began. Dearest Anna. November 18th, 1944, 4th day. Becker thought it was over. He'd killed both German snipers. Time to return to his unit, report Danny's death, get back to the regular war. But he couldn't leave, not yet. Something felt unfinished. He spent the day in Danny's foxhole, going through his friend's things. The pictures of Mary, the ticket stub from London, letters from home he'd never answered. Becker wrote a letter to Danny's parents, telling them their son had been the best spotter in the division, that he'd saved lives, that he'd died instantly and hadn't suffered. Some of it was true. As the sun set, Becker made a decision. He'd stay one more night, hold this position Danny had died defending. One more night to say goodbye. November 19th, 1944, 5th day. Becker woke in the aid station before dawn. They'd brought him back for rest the previous night. Mandatory 48 hours out of the line after 3 days of sniper duels. His shoulder ached from an old shrapnel wound that acted up in the cold. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The aid station was in a ruined church about a mile behind the front lines. He couldn't rest. He kept seeing Danny's face, that perfect hole in his forehead, the surprise in his eyes. He kept thinking about the German sniper's photo, Anna and the children who'd never see their father again. He found a medic. I need to go back to my position. Corporal, you've been ordered to rest. You've been in combat I need to go back, just for a few hours. I left something there. The medic looked at him, the hollow eyes, the shaking hands, the way he kept checking over his shoulder. Classic combat fatigue. You left something? My spotter's personal effects? I promised I'd send them home. It was partly true. He had left some of Danny's things, but really he needed to see the place one more time. Needed to know it was real, that it had happened, that Danny was really gone. The medic sighed. 2 hours, then you come back and rest, or I'll have the MPs drag you back. Becker made his way back through the forest in the pre-dawn darkness. Found the crater where it had all started. Danny's shallow grave was undisturbed. He knelt beside it, said words he couldn't remember later. Something about Brooklyn and Mary and being a best man and how sorry he was. He gathered what was left of Danny's things. A few letters, the photo of Mary, his lucky rabbit's foot that hadn't been lucky enough. Put them in his pack to send home. Then he heard engines. German vehicles, moving through the forest on the logging road to the east. He should leave, get back to the aid station. His job here was done, but he climbed a tree instead, pulled himself up despite his exhausted muscles protesting. From 15 feet up he could see the road, 2 German half-tracks and a Kubelwagen, probably a reconnaissance patrol probing American lines. They stopped 200 yards away. Soldiers dismounted. An officer with binoculars scanning the American positions. They were marking locations, probably for artillery strikes. Becker could let them go. He was one exhausted man with 20 rounds. They were a dozen fresh soldiers. But if they called in artillery on the aid station, he found the officer in his scope, young, maybe 25, probably had his own Anna back home. Becker's finger found the trigger. One shot. The officer crumpled. Chaos. Soldiers scrambling for cover, shouting, firing blindly into the trees. Becker worked the bolt, found another target, fired, worked the bolt again. He was mechanical now, no thought, no emotion, just muscle memory and training. By the time the Germans figured out where he was and started putting effective fire on his tree, he'd killed 4 and wounded 2 more. They retreated, dragging their casualties, engines roaring as they fled back down the road. Becker climbed down, legs shaking so badly he nearly fell. Made it back to the aid station as full daylight broke. The medic took one look at him and sedated him. He slept for 18 hours. November 20th, 1944. Official record. The Army recorded that Corporal Thomas J. Becker was evacuated for combat exhaustion and minor wounds on November 20th, 1944. His official tally: 2 confirmed enemy snipers eliminated, 1 enemy reconnaissance patrol disrupted. The Silver Star citation mentioned extraordinary heroism in eliminating enemy sniper positions that had caused significant casualties among Allied forces. It didn't mention Danny Morrison by name, didn't mention the German with the letter to Anna, didn't mention that Becker had nightmares every night for the rest of his life. He went home to Traverse City, married his high school sweetheart Elizabeth, opened a hardware store, had 3 kids, never talked about the war. When his grandchildren asked about his Silver Star, he'd just say he did his job and change the subject. But he kept a journal. He'd started it in the field hospital in England, writing down everything while it was still fresh, before the morphine and trauma could blur the details. Kept it hidden for 50 years, never showed it to anyone, not even Elizabeth. And in 1993, on his last trip back to Europe with Elizabeth, a 50th anniversary D-Day tour for veterans, he broke away from the group and went back to Hürtgen Forest. It took him 3 days to find the right spot. The forest had regrown, but the land underneath was the same. He found the area where the aid station had been, the crater where Danny had died, and using an old map and compass, found the exact position where everything had happened. That's where he buried his journal, wrapped in plastic and oilcloth, along with Danny's dog tags, the photo of Mary, the ticket stub from Going My Way. He'd carried these things for 50 years, and now it was time to let them rest where Danny had died. He said a prayer for Danny Morrison and Wilhelm Müller and all the rest. Then he went home and lived another 10 years. Died in his sleep in 2003, Elizabeth beside him. His obituary mentioned his hardware store, his family, his membership in the VFW. It said he was a decorated World War II veteran. It didn't mention that he was one of the deadliest snipers in the European theater. That wasn't the story he wanted told. October 2019. Discovery. When Klaus Weber finished reading the journal, he looked up at Major Chen. "This is extraordinary. Becker documented everything. Times, distances, weather conditions. This is one of the most complete sniper engagement records I've ever seen." Chen was on her laptop, cross-referencing names and dates. "I've found Wilhelm Müller in the German records. Gefreiter, 275th Infantry Division. Killed in action November 17, 1944. From Rothenburg ob der Tauber. His widow Anna died in 1987. Their children are still alive. The second sniper? His name was Hans Richter, based on the journal description and location. Gefreiter, 275th Infantry Division, like his partner. Also listed as killed in action, November 17, 1944. Weber stood up from his desk. And his family? His son is still alive. Michael Becker lives in Grand Rapids. I'll contact him, give him the journal, let him decide what to do with it. The dog tags, the photo of Mary, these personal items, Weber said, touching the metal box. They should go to the families. Danny Morrison's family if we can find them. I'll look into it, Chen said. Morrison was from Brooklyn. There should be records. 2 weeks later, Michael Becker, age 73, stood in the same spot where his father had buried the journal. Weber and Chen had brought him here, shown him where they'd found everything. Michael was reading his father's journal, tears running down his face. "He never told us," Michael said. "Never said a word about any of this. We knew he was a veteran, knew he had a silver star, but this, 5 days, 2 enemy snipers, his spotter killed. How did he live with this?" "He lived with it the only way he could," Weber said gently, "by burying it, by moving forward, by building a life that meant something beyond the war." Michael looked at the journal, at Danny's dog tags. He kept Danny's things all those years. I remember him sitting in the basement sometimes, late at night when he thought we were asleep, just sitting there, holding something in his hands. Now, I understand, it was these dog tags, this photo, he was remembering. Chen handed Michael a folder. "We've identified both German snipers your father faced. Their families have been notified. Wilhelm Mueller's son asked if he could correspond with you. He said his mother always wondered exactly how his father died. Now he knows it was quick, professional, soldier to soldier. He wanted to thank your father for taking his personal effects." Michael nodded, unable to speak. They stood in silence for a moment in the Hürtgen Forest. The trees rustled in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell was ringing. It was peaceful now, this place where so much blood had been spilled. "Your father was 22 years old when this happened," Weber said. 22, and he had to make impossible decisions, life and death. Every second for 5 days. He saved American lives by eliminating those snipers. The psychological pressure alone would break most people. "It did break him," Michael said quietly. "Not obviously, not dramatically, but I see it now, looking back. The way he'd sometimes stare at nothing. The way he'd flinch at unexpected sounds. The way he'd wake up at night and go sit in the kitchen, drinking coffee until dawn. He was still fighting this battle 50 years later. Many of them were," Chen said. "That generation came home and buried their trauma, built suburbs and factories and families on top of it, but it never really went away." Michael closed the journal, held it against his chest. "I'm glad he wrote it down. Glad he preserved the story. My grandchildren should know what their great-grandfather did, what it cost him, what that generation sacrificed." He looked at the forest around them, the tall trees reaching toward the sky, the peaceful shadows between the trunks. 3 men died here because of war. Danny and the 2 German snipers. My father survived, but part of him died here too. The part that could see the world as safe, as making sense, as fair. He came home, but he never really left this forest. They drove back to the museum in silence. Michael would take the journal and the metal box with Danny's things home to Michigan, share the story with his family, donate copies to museums and archives. The truth would be preserved, as his father had intended. But that night, alone in his hotel room, Michael read one entry from the journal that he hadn't shared with Weber or Chen. It was dated December 24th, 1944, written in a hospital in England. "They're calling me a hero, 5 days, 2 German snipers dead, reconnaissance patrol stopped. But I keep thinking about that young German sniper, the second one. He was good, maybe better than me. Half a second slower on the trigger, and it would be him going home and me in the ground. What made me faster? Training, luck? Danny watching over me, I'll never know. All I know is that I'm alive and 3 men are dead, Danny and 2 Germans. The math doesn't work out to heroism. It works out to survival. I survived, that's all. And now I have to figure out how to live with that. How to go home to Elizabeth and pretend I'm the same man who left. How to have children and not see Danny's unborn kids in their faces. How to sell hammers and nails and not remember the weight of a rifle. How to be normal when nothing will ever be normal again. Merry Christmas. I'm alive. 3 men are dead. That's my gift to myself. The knowledge that I'm a killer who got lucky. God help me. Michael closed the journal and looked out at the German night. Somewhere out there, Wilhelm Müller's son was reading his father's last letter. 2 German families were getting closure, 7 decades late. And Michael finally understood his father. Not the hardware store owner, not the quiet man who taught him to fish. He understood the 22-year-old boy who'd spent 5 days in hell and came out alive, but not whole. The next morning, Michael flew home with his father's journal. At home in Grand Rapids, he placed the journal in a display case with a simple plaque. Corporal Thomas J. Becker, 1922-2003. 5 days in Hürtgen Forest, 59 years of carrying the weight. Both took courage. The original journal would go to the Library of Congress. Historians would study the tactical details, analyze the shots, add it to the literature of sniper warfare. But for Michael, the real treasure was simpler. Understanding that his father had been both a killer and a builder, both broken and strong, both a hero and a human being who did his job when the world asked the impossible of 22-year-olds. Thomas Becker held the line in Hürtgen Forest for 5 days in November 1944. He held the memories for 59 years after. Both were acts of heroism. And now, finally, his war was over.